Hey, Nerferders, I'm Addy Thomas. Thanks for joining us for a special episode of Certain Point of View. Don't worry, Ben is still here. He's just joining us for a segment that we actually ended up recording a little bit earlier. We were going to put it on an episode, but it ended up going a whole lot longer than we expected because we decided to look back at the entire MCU and sort of how we thought about these MCU movies in retrospect and hindsight now that we're going into Infinity War at this point. So Hans, our friend Hans, is joining us to talk about these movies, to really briefly kind of hit each one. We'll talk about that in just a second, but don't forget to go to our website, certainpov.com. And, of course, you can rate, review, and subscribe to all of our podcasts there. Check out our adventures on Twitch. All of that on our website, certainpov.com.
Well, now to join us to look back on the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we're going into Infinity War, because it has been a long journey. It's a journey that started in 2008. It was at a point where I believe we got the Dark Knight that same summer, so DC was still good. It was a very different time,
very different time.
But Hans, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. How you guys doing?
Good.
Great.
That's good to hear.
You're joining us, the Real Movie Critic. You can find him at realmoviecritic.com. He's joining us today just to kind of briefly go over, sort of reminisce about these movies a little bit, and then give our rankings on these movies as well. Just really brief top five. We're not going to do some sort of definitive ranking on all of this, especially because I think we'll have some arguments maybe at the top and at the bottom for these movies for this series.
For sure we'll have.
But we're gonna stick with the top five. But to kick this off, we started with what is actually an independent film, and that is the first Iron Man movie in May 2nd of 2008,
yes.
Directed by Jon Favreau. So that was the start to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it feels like that's kind of it's had a lasting appeal. What do you guys? What do you guys like? Sort of, what is your one thing that sticks out to you with this movie that you love or dislike or whatever?
It's the movie that started it all. It really did. At the time, you didn't even thought about having a cinematic universe, let alone an Avengers thing. And once you heard about Phil Coulson talk about Shield, you're like, oh. And then once you hear, and then if you actually stuck and saw the ending credit scene with Samuel Jackson's Nick Fury, which I didn't. I don't know if y'all did in the first time. That got me really, really excited. I was like, wow, they're actually doing this. They're going to start an Avengers type of thing. Yep. And I didn't think it was going to be that big. I just got excited. But, man, it really started off it started off in a strong note. And really it's because of Robert Downey Jr. playing Tony Stark. He was meant for that role. He really was. He was perfect, great casting and everything. And I think it was a big part of the success for Iron Man.
Yeah. Ben, what are your thoughts?
I loved that movie. It's still probably top 3 movies for me in the MCU, just because, again, it was such a strong entry into developing the world. I think, Incredible Hulk did a lot of that same stuff because it came out before Iron Man did.
No, it came after.
Actually, no. Incredible Hulk came out 2 months later. It's the same summer.
Oh,
yeah. I know.
For whatever reason, I thought that was the other way around.
No.
I thought, yeah. So yeah, I think it does like a great job of establishing the world. It does a great job of oh crap, this is they're really going for this. Robert Downey Jr. The casting of Robert Downey Jr. was extremely risky for the time. Now you look at it and you go, oh, well, that's a no-brainer. Of course you'd cast Robert Downey Jr. But back then, Robert Downey Jr. was hadn't made his comeback yet. He was still damaged goods as far as Hollywood was concerned.
Well, yeah,
so this was a brave movie, and they told a really tight, compact, smart origin story that was faithful enough to the origins that it made the movie nerd or the comic book nerds super happy and the fanboys happy, while still having a lot of broad access for everybody else with a character that was a big part of the Marvel universe, but not their A game by any stretch of the imagination.
Right, he was known more by the comics fans than necessarily general fans. And I would include myself in that group because I sort of had a general knowledge of who comics characters were. I was more of a DC fan anyway, so I was more of a Batman guy. But Yeah, Iron Man. I absolutely loved when it came out. I'll admit, while I did stay for the after credit scene because other friends told me there was an after credit scene. I had no idea who Nick Fury or the Avengers were. So
really?
Yeah, I had no idea. I did not
you
know
were
what Shield
adorable.
was.
I had a good idea. But my first thought was like, hold on, Nick Fury's black now? Oh, okay, let's go. And I didn't mind it because it was Samuel Jackson, and I thought, hey,
Right.
he'll be perfect.
Where's David Hasselhoff?
Yeah, I mean, I had no clue. So let's move on to the Incredible Hulk. Same summer, June 13th of 2008. That's the Ed Norton Hulk. It's sort of the forgotten stepson of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
That's putting it
It's a
nicely.
movie that I still really like. I like the Abomination. I hope that we get to see him come back. I want to see the leader come back. I think we have a good episode of Another Pass coming out this week, if I'm right. Me and Ben are going to be on it with Case talking about it. So I'm not going to say a whole lot, but I'm handing it off to you, Hans, to let me know what you think of the Incredible Hulk.
All right. Now, before Ben overreacts, just hear me out. I think it's the worst movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, when I say the worst, I kind of mean like when you have a box of chocolates, it's like the worst flavor, but it's still chocolate. It's still good. All right. And when watching it at that time, I enjoyed it. Don't forget what the other Hulk movie we had with Eric Bana. That movie was just straight up trash. All right. And this one kind of made up for it, kind of. And I was like, okay, there's some good. It's a good fight. Yeah, I like the Abomination. He was cool. They did link up to the leader, which now apparently he's still walking around for some odd reason doing nothing. But, what's the actor's name? Escapes me. Ed Norton. He did a fine job. I know he had some issues afterwards. I think the recasting kind of hurts that movie a little bit. I really do. Looking into the future. But as Addy said, it's almost like the forgotten movie. But lately, I think a lot of people, the film people or the nerds, they've been rewatching it, and they're like, it's still not a bad movie. And I think that too. But I do think it's kind of forgettable, unfortunately. And maybe because of Mark Ruffalo as a Hulk, he really makes it a lot more memorable.
Yeah, they do more with the Hulk later down the road, but this movie to me is still one of the better Marvel movies. I'm in complete disagreement with you. It's like you've never seen Thor.
We'll get there.
Or Thor 2. There are some legitimately bad movies in the MCU. And this isn't one of them. I think you're right. I think it does get hurt because it gets recast, and it is it's not a reboot, and it's not a continuation of the Ang Lee Hulk. It's somewhere in between. They don't really commit to either one. My biggest problem with this movie is casting, but other than that, when you watch this movie beat for beat, it's almost identical to the first Iron Man movie as far as what you're really getting. It's a really good movie. It's a really good movie.
Yeah, I remember that was actually the critique of it that summer. The reviews all said this is just like Iron Man, and down to even comparing how the villains being sort of stronger versions of the hero sort of. Mm-hmm. Or bigger or whatever. So, yeah, well, let's move on now then to Iron Man 2. So before we got to see any of the other members of the Avengers, we already revisited Iron Man in May 7th of 2010. This was Jon Favreau's returning to direct. But this one was a little bit more troubled. I think Iron Man 2 gets a bad rap. I don't think it's a good movie. I think it's an okay movie, but there's a lot I actually enjoy about this movie. I will rewatch it every time it's on TV because I love Sam Rockwell. And I still think, I love Don Cheadle as War Machine. I love the change-up. I can't stand Terrence Howard. He was a terrible roadie in the first movie. He is the one blemish to that movie, in my opinion.
Yeah. I don't need to see Terrence Howard
I
in the MCU.
Ever again.
I didn't mind him at the time, but yeah, Don Cheadle does it a lot better, for sure. I saw more chemistry with him and Robert Downey Jr., for sure.
Yeah, the chemistry is great between them. I know some of the debate, this, I think this is also indicative maybe of some of the issues that people would eventually have with the MCU is that I think a lot of comic book fans were really expecting a darker Demon in the Bottle adaptation, and they didn't get that. So I remember that was a common criticism of this movie, that sort of hinted at it, but because it is a Disney property at this point, they were going to hold back on some of those elements and keep the MCU a little bit more family friendly at this point.
Yeah, no.
So I think that is a consequence of that, and also a consequence of building up to the Avengers as well. So it's all the world building they needed to do there.
I do agree with what you just said, because before I watched the movie, I actually read a little bit of the comics of Demon in the Bottle, and I was like, oh man, this is going to be some serious stuff. But they kind of made it a little playful of how he's suffering from alcoholism, really because the fact that he really thought he was going to die. And yeah, so that didn't really do too much for me. I also think Iron Man 2 is the second worst MCU movie, in my personal opinion. And it really is. It was just kind of like a filler leading up to the Avengers. I think that was one of the things. And I think another thing why it hurt so much, I think the villain, which was Whiplash, which nobody heard of Whiplash, to be quite honest, but I just didn't like his character. I think they would have been better off getting Crimson Dynamo or somebody better than Whiplash. I mean,
that's the first time I've heard that.
Like Mickey Rourke, he did it best with what he can, but this is one of the first villains in the MCU where I'm like, yeah, he was kind of forgettable. So, but I did like Sam Rockwell. He was cool, but
I liked Whiplash. The scene on the racetrack, I thought that was a cool scene.
Yeah, that was good.
The visuals on that are amazing.
But that final fight,
that is a really fun scene.
That final fight,
the final
underwhelming.
fight's not so great, but with when Whiplash actually enters the fight. But up until he enters the fight, I actually really enjoy that. I like the back-to-back buddy cop aspect with Don Cheadle and Robert Downey Jr. in their suits and making fun of each other's suits and overcompensating for with War Machine's extra guns and all sorts of other stuff. And the little line about the why didn't you open with the lasers? Like there's a lot to honestly.
It's a fun movie.
Yeah, to like about that.
Robert
movie.
Downey Jr. really does well with his role, and that one makes this movie a lot more watchable for sure. With him and Don Cheadle, I think, but, it's just, that final scene, it really didn't quite do it for me. It really didn't. And
here's the moment I love, though, in this movie. When Sam Rockwell shows up at the Stark Expo, and he is, I forgot what's the song he comes out to?
Oh, is it Coming to America?
No, I don't remember.
No, it's not Coming to America. It's,
I can't remember.
I forget the name of the band, something like Funky White People or something. I forget.
Funky White People?
It's.
Are you sure that's the name?
It's something like that. It's such a like he comes out dancing, trying to channel Stark as much as possible.
I do remember that.
And it's just so flat. I love that moment every time I see it when he is trying to do his best Robert Downey Jr. impression. In that moment, and Sam Rockwell, I've enjoyed in a lot of movies he's done since then as well.
Oh yeah,
so.
3 Billboards.
He's
He
a
was
great
great.
actor.
Man. 3 Billboards. If you haven't seen it, so
yeah, he's a great actor. And then you also had like the great appearance from one of my favorite comedians of all time, Gary Shandling, as the senator.
Oh yeah,
right.
Is in this movie, and that character's role in the MCU is really critical. There's a lot to like about this movie. It fills that role of like being the lead into 2 Avengers, and it has its flaws. It's not the most memorable movie. It's not my favorite movie. It's not even in the top 10 of my favorite movies of the MCU. But it's a good movie. It was a fun movie to watch. I remember like being pretty amazed by the spectacle of it all, of like seeing all the different robots like flying around and fighting, and just the look of like the look of Whiplash and his whips and stuff like that, I thought looked really, really cool. Especially that racing scene where the first time he attacks Tony, I thought looked amazing. His character was a little sketchy. I don't know that I wanted to see Crimson Dynamo instead. That might be a little bit of a stretch for me.
I mean, they're both Russian. Might as well.
I mean, now in today's news, yes, a Russia story would be interesting. But in 2010,
Whiplash
it
is Russian too.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, today it would be interesting. Now, like angling up that but Crimson Dynamo is specifically known as like a state-sponsored type thing.
You're right.
Like that would be far more interesting.
Yeah.
Now, back then, I don't think it was as nearly as much of a thing.
No.
Well, let's move on to the next summer. So jumping from 2010 to 2011, we had 2 MCU movies that summer. We kicked it off in May 6th with Kenneth Branagh's Thor. Yeah, it didn't do a lot for me. But it gave us some interesting characters like Loki, one of the most popular villains. But other than that, that movie really didn't do anything for me. It was. I think I've seen this movie the least of any MCU movie. No.
Yeah,
no,
and that was
it's not the least,
shocking.
second least.
That was shocking to me because, like you say, Kenneth Branagh, and he's doing a Thor movie about a royalty family of intrigue. Like, you think, like, oh god, like, this is right in his wheelhouse. This should be great. Like, all the pieces were in place. You had Chris Hemsworth as Thor, you had Anthony Hopkins, you have Natalie Portman, Tom Hiddleston, Idris Elba. Like, you have so many great actors, you know, Jamie Alexander as Lady Sif. Like, you have so many great actors and pieces in place for this movie to be really good. A great director, and it's flat as hell, man. This movie is so flat. It's so forgettable, from beginning to end. This is easily my second least favorite movie in all of the MCU.
Yeah.
I just did not like this movie.
Fair enough. This is like my third worst Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I do give it credit because it did really character develop a lot of these characters that are very essential in the future, especially with Thor and Loki. Yeah, I guess there was not too much of Anthony Hopkins as Odin. I guess that could suffer a little bit, let alone with Idris Elba. He barely had much to do with it. But I only give it credit because it really developed Thor and Loki, and yeah, it was the start of that, and I give it credit for that. But other than that, yeah, it's a little forgettable. Kenneth Branagh, he really didn't know how to do an action movie. I think that was his first, if I'm not mistaken. But, you know, he did what he could. And it is what it is, so.
Well, then later that summer, we had Captain America: The First Avenger, July 22nd, directed by Joe Johnston, who was actually the special effects guy on, I believe, Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. I don't know if this was the first movie he directed.
No, it's definitely not.
It wasn't? Okay. But I will say I really like the first half of this movie a lot. And there are things to like about the second half of the movie, but it feels like 2 different movies kind of jammed together, and some of the emotional beats don't really land in the second half for me. What are your guys' thoughts?
Actually, I really, really did enjoy Captain America. And before I watched this movie, I wasn't that big of a fan of Captain America, comically wise. I never was really a fan. But that movie, the way they really character developed his character, I really, really, really enjoyed. About a guy who really wants to be a soldier no matter what it takes. And it shows his grittiness and everything until he finally becomes Captain America. The only thing that's forgettable is probably the middle of the movie where they're making him as a showman instead of him battling the Nazis.
But that's the part I actually like the best in that movie.
I don't know. I just think that, you know, but I enjoyed the whole film in general. And I really enjoyed Hugo Weaving as Red Skull. I was hoping this...
Even if he didn't.
Yeah.
But, you know, other than that, I enjoyed it. I really did. It's definitely not the best of the Marvel movies, but at the time, I really did enjoy it. So...
For me, this movie is largely forgettable, unfortunately. I was never a huge Cap fan. I do like that they hit all the beats of the Cap origin story and did it well. Of, like, you know, skinny kid, you know, his best friend gets, you know, drafted. He wants to go too. He takes the serum, becomes a super soldier. He gets misused by the American government and sells war bonds. And then, you know, decides, screw this, I'm going to actually go and be a hero. And fights the Red Skull. Like, that's really everything you think you would want out of a Captain America story, except you're right, Addy. It feels like 2 completely separate, different movies. It's like one person wrote and directed the first half of the movie, and then like a completely different person with different sensibilities and different thoughts came and did the second half of the movie. But you do get a lot of great stuff. I mean, Chris Evans as, Captain America is fantastic. Hugo Weaving I can take and leave as Red Skull. That character was largely forgettable for me. But you do get Peggy Carter in this, which you got the spin-off then for the TV show, which I really enjoyed.
A great benefit.
You got Tommy Lee Jones. There's some great casting in this movie, and there's a lot of like fun things for people to do. You got the always lovable from Legends of Tomorrow, Neil McDonough as Dum Dum Dugan.
Yes.
Oh,
Anytime
that's
I
right.
get a Dum Dum Dugan appearance, I'm a happy man. Even in comic books, if Dum Dum shows up, I'm happy.
That is one of my griefs with this movie is I wanted more Howling Commandos.
I
but
did too.
You know what? I want a Howling Commandos movie at some point, or TV. That would be a great TV series. I think
I think so too. And we got a hint of it with Peggy Carter in the
Very
episode
little,
where
but
she's with them, and it is so much fun.
It was.
Yeah.
But I mean, they would be so especially after they get the Marvel Universe reintegrated again, so that Wolverine could be one of the Commandos.
Oh, yeah, that would be awesome.
I would love
Yeah.
to see them Disney streaming service. Please do
Go
a live,
for that.
do a
all
live
in on
action
that.
TV show with the Howling Commandos.
Yeah, that's what I like. Yeah, when you finally run the course of these these phases, and you're just like, all right, well, we got to start over, like all comic book stories do, and okay, we're completely rebooting. That's the first. I wanted to see the first Captain America movie be Captain America: The Howling Commandos. That's the story I want told.
Well, and what you can really do with something like that, not to get too sidetracked, but you can do some of the stuff that they talk about in Winter Soldier with this idea of the war machine being built and Shield's origins happening, which they did a little bit of it in in Agent Carter, but they could do a little bit more of that with the Howling Commandos.
Yeah, and really expand it out. Yeah,
That would
Exactly.
That would have been great. That would have.
Yeah.
That would have been great for sure.
Time to do another pass.
So then we've got the big movie where, I think this is truly Marvel's coming out movie, and it was the Avengers, May 4th of 2012. Joss Whedon, this is all-star talent at its finest. It's a really good movie. I like it. And I felt this way even after I saw it the first time. I felt this was the end to... I felt that the end that Iron Man 2, Thor, and Captain America didn't have, that weren't all particularly compelling, was in this movie. So in a way, this movie gets a lot of hype, but I do feel it's a little overrated. As fun as it is, it gets a little overrated.
That's where I disagree.
It's an awesome movie. It's an awesome movie, but I feel it's the end to 3 movies that didn't have good endings.
Yeah, I kind of agree, and I'll give you your chance to rebut on this, Hans, because I know this is one of your favorites. But I agree. I don't think this movie is nearly as good if you didn't have 2 movies not paying off, getting paid off in this movie. If this was the movie that started it all, and this movie had to stand on its own, those payoffs aren't quite as big. Those moments aren't quite as big. It's still an amazing spectacle, and it's still a lot of fun to see all those characters, especially in the fight for New York, when you get that big circular shot of all the heroes together, and they're and then the Hulk goes rampaging off. And as a huge Hulk fan, seeing this new version of a Hulk was super great.
This is the Hulk that erased our memories of the Hulk before.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, everybody was like, "Oh, well, I guess this Hulk was so good it made you go, well, definitely not the Ang Lee Hulk, and I'm pretty sure not the other Hulk either, because this Hulk is awesome," which is what I've always wanted out of a Hulk movie. So, from that aspect, it has a lot of great moments. I don't know that another Avengers movie has quite surprised me and thrilled me in the same way since then.
I could agree.
So from that aspect, to me, it's probably the best Avengers movie from that aspect.
I'd agree with that.
And because it's also a little simpler, it's not quite as frenetic as the others. And we'll see what we're going to get out of Infinity War. Lord only knows. But I think it's not my favorite movie, but it's top 10 easy top 10 movie.
Well, I kind of disagree with y'all. This is one of my favorite movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, mainly because, to me, that's the movie that really started it all. It really put the MCU on the map. And it was the first movie that Disney was officially for Disney. It was the Avengers. And it just showed that, Disney knows what they're doing. And just to see those heroes just come together and really just fight. That Battle of New York scene is definitely one of my favorite scenes ever in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because when I was watching it, I was so in awe of how great everything went. I give a lot of credit to Josh Whedon and really creating this, getting a good story out of this, and yeah, man, there's a lot of quotables there too. I mean, who knew that the shawarma scene will still be remembered still today? You know, of just the Avengers just eating.
Well, I quoted the "I'm bringing the party to you" the last time when we were playing WoW streaming.
Constantly.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot of.
Although, and one of my favorite quotes is my secret.
That's my secret, Cap. I'm always hungry.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a lot of quotables in that. That's you know, just recently I was watching with my nephew. It was his first time watching the movie, and he was loving it. Especially the part where Hulk just grabbed Loki and started smashing it on the floor. My nephew was cracking up. My nephew Josiah, he was loving it. He was loving the Hulk. And just to see him getting excited, seeing Captain America, then seeing Thor, then seeing the Hulk, man, it was awesome. It definitely is rewatchable. This film is definitely rewatchable. I could see it every single time, and I would still love it. And man, I love this movie. I really do.
Yeah.
You know,
it's an incredibly rewatchable movie. I can't disagree with you on any of those points. I think there's a wealth of riches in the MCU. I mean, I'd easily put this over the last 4 movies we talked about. So that's everything but Iron Man. And I'd put it significantly above the last 4 movies we just talked about. So yeah, it's a fun movie. I just think there's a little overhype purely because it isn't a complete movie, and
Can't stand on its own.
yeah, and it benefits from some of the weaknesses of the others. That's my only, like, it's such a minor criticism.
Yeah,
so it sounds like I'm a hater.
it's definitely a nitpicky thing, yeah, and I can
Yeah.
understand that if you're being nitpicky. It's definitely not the perfect movie, but it's something that, to me, is a little groundbreaking because right now the only movie that has a team up is the X-Men, but I thought the Avengers did it a lot better, in my personal opinion, when it comes to comic book movies in general at that time. So
Yeah. Yep. Well, then the next summer we saw the start of Phase 2. So that's when we saw Iron Man 3. We revisited Iron Man for the conclusion of his trilogy, but his character for sure has not been, his arc is not over for sure. May 13th of 2013, we had Shane Black, who was a big part of resurrecting Robert Downey Jr.'s career. He got to direct an Iron Man movie. Favreau left. And on not the best of terms with Marvel, but he stayed on playing Happy Hogan, but he did not, and he produced, but he did not direct this third time around. I know Hans is gonna disagree with me on this, and I think Ben's gonna probably line up a lot closer to me on this one. But this is, at the time, this was my favorite MCU movie, and is still in my top 5. And I know. This is one of 2 major nerd hills that I die on, but I still love this movie. It is incredibly rewatchable for me. It is everything that I like. I'm a huge Shane Black fan. I love his sensibilities as a director. I love the way he subverts expectations. I like the unpredictability. I have no love for the Mandarin whatsoever. So I am perfectly happy with how they handled the Mandarin. And I like that this is also, like, there's really interesting character arc with this movie. And before I hand it off to Hans or Ben, whoever of you pick it up, I will mention that there is another past episode out there with Case, with me, Ben, and Case, talking about this movie, where we kind of go into detail on some things that can be improved, and that I definitely saw like 2 major things that could be improved with this movie. But yeah, it's still this was one of the first times I walked out of a theater and I so badly wanted to go back in and rewatch the movie right after seeing it. So I don't think I've had that experience with a lot of movies. So
you're putting it to me, Ben? All right.
Yep, go ahead.
All right, it is a good movie. I'll give you that. I think the only sore spot for me was that Mandarin twist. I mean, if you look at the trailers, you were really getting hyped. I was like, whoa, they really made the Mandarin cool, especially with Ben Kingsley. Ben freaking Kingsley. Come on. I feel like they wasted his role. I'm like,
but to me, that's the gift.
No.
The gift that Ben Kingsley gave us such a
No.
comedic, like unexpected performance.
you don't do
as
that.
Trevor.
You don't do that to an Oscar-winning actor. You do not do that. No. Come on. Like,
There's nothing sacred in Hollywood.
I mean, it's just, and I was watching with my youngest brother at that time, and he's not a comic book fan whatsoever. And after we talked about the movie, he was like, yeah, he thought the Mandarin twist it shouldn't even be there. It was just, and I think the payoff at the end with what's his name, Aldrich or whatever his name is, who calls himself the Mandarin, and I was like, it was another reason why, why some people criticize MCU for their villains, and I think that is. But like I said, it was still a good movie. The whole thing where his house gets destroyed, that final scene where he's jumping from suit to suit. That was an awesome scene. It really was. Mm-hmm. I still enjoy it. I still think it's a good popcorn flick. I don't think it's the worst, as some people say. I really don't. But it's just that scene just really left a bad taste in my mouth. It really did.
All right, here's my rebuttal. And I am going to side a little closer to Addy. I think you have a valid point. I think you could have made that movie without the Mandarin.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I don't think he served much of a purpose in that movie except to get some nerd traction for that film of oh my god, they're doing the Mandarin. That's such a weird character. We all know if you're an Iron Man fan, you know how integral he is to Iron Man lore. But Addy, you've said this a million times, and I completely agree with you. I don't know anybody on the face of planet Earth I've never heard be like, Mandarin is in my top 10 villains list.
That's true.
It's never happened in the history of nerddom.
Yeah, no,
never.
I agree with that.
Ever. Even in Iron Man fans are like, yeah, he's great, but he's not my
Crimson
top 10
Dynamo,
villains.
guys.
Yeah, he's right up there with Crimson Dynamo.
I put Mandarin over Crimson Dynamo for the record, but but
how many spots ahead of Crimson Dynamo is he?
I'll get back to you on that.
You gotta go. You know why you go is because you got to go so damn deep into the list of where you are in as far as villains that you care about. That's why I kind of pump the brakes on the criticism for people when they say they have a problem with how the Mandarin was handled.
I agree with you. I really do. I can see why you all would say that, but it's just the trailers, the way they hyped his character up. Yeah, I felt it felt like you go to the party and there's no food. You're like, oh, come on, and then you're just unhappy the rest of the day, even though there's a lot of cute girls dancing. You just don't feel like doing anything. You're like, But
then you're going to the party for the
you
wrong
don't want
reason,
to party
bro.
at that point. That's your problem.
Yeah.
Here's my thoughts. I'll wrap up the thoughts on Iron Man 3 with this. And it's very, again, like I said, this is one of two nerd hills that I die on, and that's The Last Jedi and Iron Man 3. And both for very similar reasons, because they subverted expectations for the sake of some thematic and character growth. And that's what I appreciate about both of those movies. Some people see that character growth as wasted in Iron Man 3 because of because of blowing up the suits, and then he's right back into the mix of everything at the beginning of Age of Ultron. I think they're especially when if you take a bigger step back and kind of look at how Tony approaches his mission, going through Iron Man 3, going into sort from the very beginning. If you look at it from Iron Man to 2 to Avengers to Iron Man 3, Ultron, and then Civil War, I think there's actually even into Spider-Man Homecoming, you see a very fascinating arc for Tony Stark that's come across these movies. So I really like how it functions in in the bigger picture still. And that's why it still maintains a status as a top 5 MCU movie for me personally. Here is my very bottom of the list, Thor: The Dark World. That same year in November of 2013, we had Alan Taylor, who was famous for directing several episodes of Game of Thrones. This movie was I don't know if this movie is truly as bad as it is. I mean, the villains are very bad, but are very bland. Loki is interesting in this movie. I do think this movie was marketed very poorly. There was a lot of talk about class issues in Asgard and sort of the darker side of Asgard, which we actually kind of get a little bit with Hela's motivations in Ragnarok, which I was happy about. But then we also have sort of a lot of the trailers showed this big Lord of the Rings style epic battle, which ended up being a 30-second scene at the beginning of the movie, and that was it. So,
fair enough.
That's I don't like this movie for that reason. I have maybe softened a little bit on it. I talked to a friend of mine who says he actually enjoys it. He says it's a mediocre movie for sure, but because he had no expectations going into it, he didn't watch any trailers going into it, he didn't have any of the expectations that I had, so he kind of just enjoyed it for what it was. So it's a movie I'm kind of interested to go back to and watch at some point to see if that has, maybe after Infinity War, to see where it fits with all of this. But there's still a lot that's sort of unforgivable with that movie, with Natalie Portman being such a wasted actress in this movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Christopher
So bad
Eccleston
that we
as
don't ever
Malekith.
see her again.
Right. Yeah, Malekith was such a waste.
He was
but,
a waste.
Outside of that, I will say Frigga and Loki were actually fairly interesting in this movie.
That was the best part.
Yeah.
That was.
But, yeah, what are your guys' thoughts?
Well, honestly, I don't hate Thor: The Dark World as many people do. I don't. At the time, I loved it, but then when you watch it again and again, you see the flaws. I do, and I think the reason I loved it at first because I was under, probably, under like the nerd of alcoholism, because you're like, oh, look at Thor, he's flying.
I thought you were going to just tell us you had a much more serious issue.
Yeah, exactly. I was just a little too happy watching it, and then when you watch it again, you're like, oh, yeah, this is not that good. Once I sobered up from the nerdgasms, but yeah, if you really watch the movie, Natalie Portman was really phoning it in. She really was. She didn't want to do it anymore, and it's a shame because Natalie Portman is a great actress. I thought that was a shame. But yeah, as Addy said, the dynamic between Thor and Loki is definitely some good drama to watch. It really is. Yeah, the final scene could be a little forgettable. They did have a lot of Easter eggs too to get you excited about a little bit. When you see the world, you see Searcher. That's one of them. But once again, it's wasted. Anthony Hopkins acting, that's pretty much wasted. There's a lot of wasted things in that film. And yeah, I could see why people could see it forgettable. For me, it's like in the middle of the rankings of the MCU. Not great, but I don't think it's the worst that I have ever seen. But yeah, that's my personal opinion on it.
Yeah, this is easily the worst MCU movie on the list for me. They took everything that didn't work in the first Thor movie and doubled down on it. Like it just takes all the stuff that I didn't like about the first Thor movie, and it's like they didn't understand the Thor mythology and the Thor universe and what people like about like there are some really rabid Thor fans out there. I've never really liked Thor as a superhero. He's a little too Superman-esque for me, although I do like the fact that he's a heavy drinker. But other than that, he's easily not one of my favorite heroes. But they just seem to take all the fun and all the excitement and all of the stuff that we got in Thor Ragnarok that made that universe and that character so enjoyable, and they seem to go the exact opposite way with it in this movie.
I could see that.
I will say, and maybe, I don't know if maybe this is also a consequence of me getting to enjoy a particular cartoon, but the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Hero cartoon did a really good job at handling Thor and Loki and Odin, because especially for the first season, it is the backbone of that story. The Warriors 3 are a lot of fun. Sif is a lot of fun. You even get Beta Ray Bill. So I'm not a Thor fan, but I got to enjoy some of a lot of really interesting aspects. Enchantress is in that, and the Executioner is in that. So there's a lot of really a lot of good potential. So I wonder if also that maybe that cartoon also spoiled me a little bit going into
I think this movie for you and for me as well suffered from what we've said has ruined a lot of Last Jedi, and that is high expectations or wrong expectations for what this movie was going to be.
Yeah, Can't complain with that. Yeah, can't argue with that.
Then moving into the next year, we saw April 4th in 2014. So April, we started seeing this summer movie season actually start to creep out a little bit, because now we're starting to see the glut of MCU movies. Like, we're at the point, actually, this is, so 23rd, there are a couple other years that we had 2 MCU movies, but this is where, like, they pretty much committed to doing 2 MCU movies a year. So we had Iron Man 3 and Thor, and then 2014 we had Cap and Guardians of the Galaxy. Cap was in April, so already outside of the typical summer movie season, we started seeing it expanding out. Captain America: The Winter Soldier, great movie, still one of the best. It's not one of my top 5, but it is a great movie in the MCU for sure. It is still enjoyable to rewatch. I don't find it quite as strong on the rewatch. Quite as strong as that first time, just because you know the reveal the second time you're going through it. But it is still such a cool movie. It does some this is where I felt they really. The MCU really showed that they were able to do interesting things with characters that we kind of thought were bland. It handled a character like Cap, who is a catalyst for the other, who's a fairly static character, but is a catalyst for the people around him. And they did such a masterful job at like developing the way they had, Bucky and Falcon and Widow and all those other characters sort of affected by him in very interesting ways. And sort of the bigger development, of course, with Hydra was such a huge moment.
Yeah.
But absolutely great movie.
I love that. I love that movie. I think it was a good movie pretty much from the beginning to the end. It just showed that how much they could keep a secret in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because nobody saw that coming. Nobody. And man, that's what made this movie so great. To see the Hydra takeover, and man, some great action scenes. I never even heard of the Russo brothers until that movie, and I was like, okay, Russo brothers, I see what y'all do here. I see what y'all did there, and yeah, it's an awesome movie, a completely great movie. My only thing, and I still have a question with this, is where the heck was Hawkeye during the whole ordeal? Was he with his family somewhere else? But
he was on a mission somewhere else. I think
I think they say
established
that he's on a
later.
mission
He's
or
on a
something.
mission somewhere else around the globe.
Yeah. I want to say that. I feel like that was said somewhere.
Oh, okay.
I want to say Widow says it's at some point or something.
Oh, does she?
That. I don't. Yeah. Maybe I'm just, that's headcanon maybe
Or
or something.
it was mentioned in an interview somewhere or something, because people have questioned that. But I mean, they don't have to be they're not married, they're not joined at the hip. They could be on a mission somewhere.
And by the same token, it's kind of like why would Iron Man not jump into this fight? Well, it's not something he's aware of.
Yeah.
I think I was okay with the fact that they introduced Falcon was good. If they had Hawkeye in the midst with all of that too, I think it would have been.
Then it's an Avengers movie.
Right.
I agree. But with the past films, you see Hawkeye right there with S.H.I.E.L.D., so I don't know. That's just me being nitpicky, really.
But S.H.I.E.L.D. S.H.I.E.L.D. is a global entity. They're not, he can't be everywhere. It makes sense to me.
Okay.
Here's what's exciting about this movie for me. There's a couple things that stand out. Number one, Baltruck the Leaper is in this movie. Okay.
Yes. Whoever thought we'd get Baltruck the Leaper.
Right. If you guys are going to get excited about Crimson Dynamo and the Mandarin, you got to give props to the Leaper. Okay. Second of all, Gary Shandling's Hail Hydra in this movie is so fantastic.
Yeah, it was good.
On the steps of the Capitol is so fantastic. Over time, this movie has dwindled down from the top of my rankings into somewhere in the middle of the pack, but it still has a high place for me because of its effect on the overall universe, especially Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yes.
Because it really took Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and made that a really super enjoyable show.
Yeah, for sure.
By tying that in, because they were still under the guise that it's all connected. And I say that in quote marks because it's not all connected anymore.
Pretty much.
But back then, we still believed this was going to be a thing that happened, and they were still trying to make that happen. And that was exciting to see that tie in and pay off on a TV show, which made it. That was really a super aggressive, brave thing that had never been done in Hollywood before. to try and do something that big, keep a secret that tight, and tie it into a TV show was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely amazing. I enjoyed it a lot. I really did, but I agree with Addy too. Is it rewatchable? Yeah, but you know what's going to happen now, so it kind of ruins the element of surprise. So, but yeah, that's about it.
Well, the other thing I like about this is like this is kind of the first time where they really went for like, hey, we're not just going to do like a typical superhero movie, but we're going to do genre movies with superheroes in them.
Yes.
And that I think like has kind of helped extend this golden age of superhero movies into something bigger than what it could have easily have been of just superhero movies.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yep. As well, later that summer, in August 1st of 2014, we got Guardians of the Galaxy, which is still my number one MCU movie by far. James Gunn, definitely one of my favorite directors. Love his sensibilities as a director. I love the crazy characters. I guess I just love space opera. I think ultimately I'm just gonna have to admit that that's why I love Guardians. It's why I love Star Wars. It's why I love Green Lantern. This scratched that itch for me. I felt like this was like the new Star Wars because this is before we got Star Wars back.
Right.
This was like, to me,
Yeah.
this was like, because we were still in sort of like, we had Clone Wars, yes, but we kind of felt like the prequels were the end of our Star Wars experience at that point. And so Star Wars fandom was really still in a very a dark place at this point. So this hit a particular spot for me that I had been wanting. I still love this movie, even though I know that the little dance-off moment's going to happen every single time. I still love it. I love the character arc for Star-Lord in this movie. I'm a huge Rocket and Groot fan. So yeah, I'm. I don't know if there's a whole lot bad I can say about this movie. So I'm gonna have to hand it off to you guys.
Go ahead, Ben.
All right, so I love this movie, and as much grief as I've given you guys, especially you, Hans, about Mandarin and Crimson Dynamo, I couldn't have found a Guardians of the Galaxy fanboy anywhere
Right?
that would admit to it before this movie came out. Now everybody is claiming, oh, no, I love Guardians of the Galaxy. I've always loved the Guardians of the Galaxy. I call bullshit, sir. I call bullshit.
I will fully admit that I thought this was going to be the movie that broke the MCU. And then I saw the trailer
Nobody
for it.
heard of these guys.
Right, like this is like Talking Raccoon and Talking Tree, and I had seen Rocket and Groot in some cartoons, and I enjoyed them because they're sort of fun and wacky, and they were kind of fun. But I remember the moment that first trailer came out, I was a little intrigued because I love the sense of humor, and I did go see a preview event where they showed a clip of the breakout from the prison scene. I saw that, and I was like, I'm a fan.
I'm in.
The moment I saw that scene, I was totally in. So
yeah, this is easily the biggest reach for the MCU. This was their biggest gamble by far.
And it
is
paid
to
off
try
big
and
time.
make the Guardians of the Galaxy a thing, because they have never been a thing in the comic books. I mean, they've been around and they've had different iterations and stuff like that, but it has never been a thing. So for this movie to work and to work as well as it does, this is easily a top 10, maybe top 5 movie for me. It is so good, so well done, so well constructed, so well told, so well acted, so well cast. Music score is their best out of any movie.
Yeah,
The music in this movie is fantastic.
score and soundtrack, both of them.
The soundtrack is ridiculous. Everything about this movie works, and it is a testament to James Gunn to be able to pull that off, because on paper, should have sucked.
Yeah, and that was the first movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe where I really thought they took a big risk, because going into it, I was very, very, very skeptical. Because, as Ben said, I didn't know who the heck the Guardians of the Galaxy were. I don't know who Star-Lord is. I don't know what this Talking Tree is about, Groot. The only time I ever seen Rocket Raccoon before was when I was playing Marvel vs. Capcom 3. And I was like, who is this? Who is this raccoon? Like, where did he come from? I really did not know anything about it. And yeah, coming into the movie, I don't know if y'all remember this, but Vin Diesel was teasing, saying he's going to get a big role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all that. And everyone's excited.
Right.
Oh, Vin Diesel, what's he going to be? I really thought it was going to be Drax or somebody cool, and all it is, he was just doing the voice of Groot, just saying "I am Groot" the whole freaking time. So I'm like, what was all that? I felt a little let down before that movie came in. I was like, okay, so I'm just gonna see Vin Diesel just say 4 words. Great. Even though I did like the casting of Bradley Cooper as Rocket Raccoon, I thought that was great. The casting was pretty good. I definitely give it credit for that.
The casting's fantastic. Zoe Saldana, come on.
All right, yeah.
Good Lord.
And yeah, it was hilarious. I think it was one of the funniest Marvel movies out there for sure. And it was an enjoyable movie for me. It really was. Yes, the dance off, some people hate it. I personally like it because it just shows how it's just part of their theme. It's part of that Guardians culture. When I really looked into it now, with the way they're trying to make these movies, and it's definitely.
Well, it was perfect for the character.
Yeah.
It fit. It just fit.
Exactly.
So.
And I know some people who love Ronan the Accuser, and they're saying no, they didn't bring him justice. I'm like, whatever. I mean, I hadn't really heard of Ronan either, so. Whatever.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Explain to me the depth of Ronan the Accuser, please.
Yeah.
Go on. Show me where there was the 10-page dissertation about Ronan the Accuser before this movie came out.
I'll say Ronan probably ranks higher than the Mandarin, though. I'll go that far.
I don't know. I don't know. We'll see.
Cosmic Marvel does have its fans.
Yeah.
And I think the Annihilation arc was happening just before that. And then there was some big stuff with Ronan there. And he has some big roles in Secret Wars as well. Yeah. So, he's been a part of some major events.
Okay.
And so, I will give Ronan a little bit more credit. But, let's not pretend Ronan...
It's the most fleshed out villain of all time. Come on.
And my comparison for Ronan is, if you compare the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie to A New Hope, he has actually just as much screen time as Vader. And Vader in A New Hope, obviously, huge Star Wars fan. Vader is one of my absolute favorite characters and favorite villains in movies, period. But he is a pretty one-dimensional villain in A New Hope. It's only really in Empire where he really earns his reputation as truly cutthroat. He's choking out admirals and Moffs left and right.
Screwing over people, yeah.
He's able to outsmart Han. He lays a great
Lando.
trap for exactly. He lays a great trap for Luke. All sorts of great stuff. So he really comes into his own in Empire more than he does in A New Hope. Grand Moff Tarkin is just as big a villain as Vader is in that first movie. And if you remember, A New Hope ends with Vader comically yelling as he's spitting out into space.
Yeah.
Let's remember that. So to me, that's with that I've always kind of felt a strong comparison with this first Guardians movie and A New Hope. So it sort of fit that vibe for me. I was always fine with Ronan being that way. As sort of flat as he is. I am sort of interested to see, since he is going to be showing up in the Captain Marvel movie, you now have a chance maybe to flesh out his character a little bit more. So
is it the same actor?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
It is.
That's
Lee
awesome.
Pace, so.
Right. And one thing I'll remember from this is the dancing little Groot. I just love that scene so much that I even bought one myself. I think I gave you one too, Addy. So.
You did. I love it.
Yeah, so definitely, for sure. I love that. Just shows how Guardians was, and it's an enjoyable movie for sure.
Well, then we had the next big Avengers movie. It's not the end of Phase 2, but Avengers Age of Ultron came out May 1st of 2015. Joss Whedon, a little bit of drama with Joss Whedon coming out of this movie. It's a very dense movie. I like this movie still a lot. I will say I like the first Avengers movie more. But I think there's a lot of really cool ideas in this movie. I wish Ultron got a chance to be in more than one movie, that we got a chance to see Ultron as a force for good, a positive initiative. In fact, if you a little bit of a spoiler, but if you go to our, I think we've done another past episodes for both Age of Ultron and for Iron Man, definitely for Iron Man 3. And I think in both of those episodes, we talk about we wish the House Party initiative at the end of Iron Man 3 was actually the Ultron initiative. So we get to see Ultron do something for good. And, we also see, because it also kind of fits that theme of like Tony being able to step away from having to be in all the suits and let some things handle themselves on their own. So like it's the one thing, but I love James Spader as Ultron. There's some truly creepy moments and some really fun moments, and they do a really good job at really starting to break the team apart in this movie.
Yeah, for sure. I enjoyed this movie. I didn't think it is as bad as some people say it would be. I really think it's still a well put together movie. Ultron was great at the beginning. I just thought at the end, I think they just defeated him just a little bit too easily. But as Addy said, James Spader was awesome in that film. Like I said, it's just an enjoyable movie. It was just a good popcorn flick, but yeah, it didn't really stand out. It didn't bring the awe factor like the Avengers did, but I still enjoyed it. So,
yeah, this felt like Joss had kind of burnt out a little bit for me. There was just a little too much going on. He was trying to juggle a little too much. It's a little too action-packed. There's a couple moments that don't quite work for me, like Quicksilver doesn't quite work for me, and his death doesn't quite work for me.
Well, he
it
doesn't quite work for himself either.
Yeah.
For a fast guy,
that was
he's not
after.
fast.
Was it before or after X-Men Days of Future Past? I think it was after.
Yeah,
I
I think he came
so,
out
too.
after.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
that Quicksilver really overshadowed him for sure. So.
Yeah. So it suffered from that, but it just wasn't a very good character.
Yeah.
His death didn't make a lot of sense.
Did he?
Even his sacrifice was okay, but it didn't really feel like it cost anybody anything.
Yeah, I didn't care for that.
Because we didn't really get to know Scarlet Witch well enough for her to feel her loss in this. So there's some things in this movie that just don't quite work as well as maybe I wanted them to work, and I feel like a lot of it I had already seen before. And being a science nerd, like dropping a city, you're like, okay, that's a big deal, but you would have destroyed the entire Earth. It wasn't going to be like a regional problem.
For sure.
That was going to be a world-ending problem. So there's a couple things in this movie that just kind of irritate me the wrong way. That kind of drops it down on my ratings a little bit. But a fun movie for sure. Like if you just turn your brain off and enjoy it, it's certainly watchable.
And once again, people are up. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. And again, people got upset because the way they just killed off Baron von Strucker, and I was like, y'all getting mad because of Baron von Strucker? Like,
right?
It's just these small things that people get mad about, But a part of me still has hope that Ultron's still around in cyberspace somewhere, just waiting. I don't know. But that could be a reach.
He's on a floppy drive somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. With Arnim Zola. Him and Arnim Zola having drinks in cyberspace. So.
Right. Having a drink on the cloud. We wrap up phase 2 with Ant-Man. This one was surrounded with a bit of drama. July 17th of 2015 is when this came out. Peyton Reed is the director there, although Edgar Wright was originally supposed to direct this movie. Ant-Man was actually supposed to be part of phase 1. This was actually there was a point at which this movie was actually going to be the movie to launch the MCU, with Edgar Wright launching with an Ant-Man movie, but Edgar Wright had a lot of other movies that he was doing at the time, so the scheduling didn't quite work out, and then by the time they were doing this, the vision that Edgar Wright had didn't quite match up with Feige and Disney and Marvel and all those parties involved, so they went their separate ways, and I think there's a faction of fans, especially film nerds, who don't like this movie because they want to see Edgar Wright's version of it. And that being said, I'd love to see Edgar Wright's version of it. But this is a truly enjoyable movie. This is easily, it's not one of my favorite movies, but I mean, Paul Rudd is so likable. I love Evangeline Lilly, Michael Douglas is awesome. The villain didn't do a whole lot for me, but I will say Michael Pena is so much fun.
Yes, Michael Pena
in this movie. I laugh out loud every time he sees Paul Rudd, in shrunken form, and he's, he panics and like passes out and all that. Like, there's so many, like him telling the story, the long drawn out stories. Like, there's so many things that are fun in this movie.
Yeah.
It's just hard not to like. I went in I wanted an Edgar Wright movie, but I couldn't help but like this movie.
Yeah, it's definitely an enjoyable movie. And one of my biggest gripes with the Avengers is like, oh, where's Ant-Man? Ant-Man has to be in there, and because he was definitely at the beginning when the Avengers started, comically speaking. And so, yeah, I was a little disappointed, but finally they bring out Ant-Man. I was like, all right, And the way they marketed this movie was hilarious, having this huge poster and just that small little Ant-Man. And yeah, with the drama with Edgar Wright, I do have a part of me do want to see his version of it. I'm just out of curiosity, and I do want to see it. But overall, it's an enjoyable movie. I liked it. I just don't know why it has to be not Hank Pym. It had to be the other guy, because I thought Hank Pym's stories. There's a lot of good story with that character as well. But they just decided to make him as an old guy, which Michael Douglas does a good job as.
I actually like the decision to go with Hank Pym as the original, Ant-Man in the past, because one, it provides a little bit of a sense of history to some of these heroes. Like you had Cap, and then all of a sudden, it's all the Avengers.
50 years of no superheroes. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool to have this history of it, so that you can go back and you can always do a period movie of Ant-Man and the Wasp fighting the Soviets or whatever, but not that they ever would necessarily do that, but I do like I think you also get into some weird territory with Hank Pym because of his history of abuse.
Yes.
As a character, I think that's one thing they wanted to avoid. Mm-hmm. So I think the other thing to add on to it is you already had a little bit of an obsessed scientist and inventor with Tony Stark. Mm-hmm. So to kind of repeat that story, I think you're treading some familiar ground. Whereas you have instead here you now have the thief, who. Maybe they could give him a little bit more sciencey stuff to do, but I think it's a refreshing addition to the lineup. It went more heist movie because you have this ex-con. Mm-hmm. I actually think it was. I agree with you. At first, I was a little weirded out that they didn't go with Hank Pym, but I'm actually really happy in the grander scheme of things that they went another direction.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was still good. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, using Scott Lang as the Ant-Man is on first glance an odd choice, but I think in the long run for the MCU it makes a lot more sense than using Hank Pym. I think like what Addy said, using Hank Pym really does send you down a familiar street of an obsessed, scientisty guy who uses technology to fight crime is very Iron Man-y, and you're automatically going to run into the comparisons of he's not nearly as good as Tony Stark's and Robert Downey Jr.'s role. Like Robert Downey Jr. has so locked down who Tony Stark is, anything that even gets near that is going to automatically be compared, and it's gonna dim in comparison. So I think it was smart to go with Paul Rudd and use him as Scott Lang and kind of make it again. Now they're doing something different. They're doing a heist movie with superheroes, which again, really smart idea instead of just doing a superhero movie. Because I think again, if you go with Hank Pym, you got to do a superhero movie for the most part, because there's not a lot else for Hank Pym to do other than a science-y movie. That's who that character is, unless you're going to get into the physical abuse, the alcoholism, the split personality issues and stuff like that, which is really going down a pretty dark path that I don't think the MCU really wanted to touch completely. Is against their brand at this point of what they had established. So this movie's super funny. The scene where with Thomas the Train still makes me laugh every time I see it.
Still one of my favorites.
Every single time. The only thing I really don't like about this movie is Yellow Jacket. Yeah. He is a super forgettable villain. There's really the actor. I don't know. I don't really know Corey Stoll from anything else, and he doesn't really do a lot with this character. and I don't know if it was just the way it was written or
Yeah.
there's just
There wasn't much to him.
Yellow Jacket is again one of those villains where you go, wait, who?
Yeah.
Right.
Technically,
and when you're talking,
technically Hank Pym becomes Yellow Jacket. That was like, when dealing with his split personality and things. So that's why I thought it was an interesting thing that they went with Yellow Jacket as the villain. I always thought that was interesting. But yeah, he is forgettable as a villain. But overall, I think Ant-Man, fun, good movie, but definitely not one of the greatest, for sure.
The only travesty I find in this movie is that they cast Judy Greer in this movie instead of letting her be her own superhero in the MCU to give her a leading role. Because I love Judy Greer. She is hilarious. She's one of the funniest women, and she's.
I hope she gets a bigger role.
Yeah, she.
I hope she gets a bigger role in this
dramatic roles too. Sorry, I keep on talking over you.
Yeah, it's okay. I hope she gets a bigger role in this next one because I'm a huge, huge fan. There's a lot of great actors in this movie. I'm just scrolling through the IMDb. You got John Slattery is in this movie as again as older Howard Stark. Haley Atwell reprises as Peggy Carter.
It was nice seeing them in the context of S.H.I.E.L.D. and with this being a post-Winter Soldier movie, like knowing that there's this distrust of S.H.I.E.L.D. and government like that created sort of an interesting dynamic with this. Because this leads in, because we also had Ant-Man show up at the Avengers facility in upstate New York.
With Anthony Mackie,
Right, great.
The fight with Falcon.
Great scene.
Yeah, it's really great. Which establishes great right into the next Avengers movie or Civil War movie.
Yep, that's the beginning of Phase 3, Captain America Civil War in 2016, the Russo brothers' second adventure into the MCU. Easily this is one of my absolute favorite MCU movies. It's not top 5 only because of the wealth of movies that we have in the MCU, but it was at one point. And it's one of those, I think, in some ways, it's really an Avengers movie, even though it is sort of a Cap movie. Rewatching it, it felt a little bit more like a Cap movie the last time I saw it, but it is also an Avengers movie. It is also carrying Tony Stark's arc, and it's also contrasting it with Cap's arc, which I think is really, really brilliantly done in this movie. And with some of the scene, like the scene at Hawkeye's farm in Age of Ultron, this is a really great follow-up to that conversation that Stark and Cap have in that movie. So it takes a lot, like this fits so well in the bigger scheme of this universe. And it really balances well, like just enough screen time for each character to have even micro arcs, but just enough to have motivations for where they fall in this fight. And it was also the movie that establishes Black Panther in a really cool way. So this movie does a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of world building, but it still is able to stay fairly focused, on the actual character arcs in this.
Definitely my second favorite movie in the MCU. For sure. I think it's definitely one of the best writing I've seen in a while in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The Civil War, comically speaking, is one of my favorite comic book arcs out there. I read it like 3 or 4 times before this movie came out. When I heard them announce it, I was like, how can they do this? How can they pull this off? And it really impressed me how great this movie really is. I didn't think it was going to be that good, but it did. And the way they balance everything together, seeing the two sides of Tony Stark and Captain America, I thought that was greatly written. Introduced Black Panther, introduced Spider-Man, who I love Spider-Man, and he was awesome in that movie, even though he was only there for a few minutes. But they barely got his rights, before they bring out the movie. So, everything went right that I really didn't think was going to go right. And Baron Zemo, I still love him as a villain. Yeah, he's not the most powerful villain, but man, that guy was smart. That guy, and you really felt for him too. You really did.
Yeah, he had great motivations. To me, this movie is like when Marvel really kind of like peaks, and they realize, there's nothing we can't do, and they just start like swinging for the fences and just throwing like, all right, what do we want to do here? Oh, we want to get Spider-Man in this movie. Let's go get Spider-Man. And they're going to do it, and they do it, and it's great. Like, Tom Holland's Spider-Man is easily the most comic book accurate Spider-Man that we've gotten on screen so far. He may not be your favorite. He's personally my favorite that we've gotten so far. And his time in this movie and his entrance into the MCU is superb. To be able to just be like, whatever, man, we're going to get our A-listers and start bringing them in. You know, and when I say A-listers, I'm talking like, you know, your Spider-Man, your X-Men, your stuff like that. Like, we're gonna start bringing that stuff back enough. Like, we've proven how amazing of a universe we can create with our B and C D list. Check out what we can do with our A list. You know, was really, really impressive to me. Baron Zemo's arc in this movie and the way that he creates arcs for other characters is one of the best told Marvel villains that we've gotten so far, to be honest with you, in my opinion. He's not my favorite character. I've never enjoyed a guy with a purple hood in the comic books, but the version that they created for the MCU is super believable and super interesting and really, really fascinating, and how he manipulates the relationships between all these people is pretty impressive. It's great storytelling. I love this movie.
Well, we're getting into some of the more recent movies, so let's speed it up just a little bit. Just give me like one thought on each of these movies. Doctor Strange, November 4th of 2016. Scott Derrickson directed it. You know what? I really enjoy this movie. It may follow up in the same formula of Iron Man 1, but it's a very compelling character, fun character. Yeah, it was better than I honestly expected it to be.
Yeah, it's definitely an enjoyable movie. Benedict Cumberbatch did a great job as Doctor Strange. What I liked is it opened up the door even more to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, going to different dimensions now, and I think with Dormammu and all that, and I think that's great. And that end with the way he tricks Dormammu, I think is great writing as well. So.
Yeah. This is the first time we got a villain that isn't beaten by brute force, but is just outthought, and that's really a testament to great writing and great thinking and creative script writing. And I love the fact that they were able to capture just the trippiness of Doctor Strange comic books. Like, it's such a bizarrely and weird experience to read that book, and to be able to translate that into film was a testament to some really creative visual artists.
Well, just last year we got 3 MCU movies. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, May 5th of 2017. This is my number 2 MCU movie. I love this movie. I really do. I love Guardians of the Galaxy already. I love the follow-up. It hit some personal notes for me that really work. The father-son story really, really works for me, and the sort of the themes of found family. So I like the character development. It was also a very fun movie. I think the first one's a little bit more fun, but this one had a little bit more depth of character in it.
It's definitely an enjoyable movie, just like the first one. A great villain with ego. I think he was I liked his intentions in that movie. I think it is very good. And the way they really created the character of Yondu and the way they sent him off, I think was great. It was perfect.
I cried.
I'm sure you did.
Yeah, this is my number 1 movie for the MCU, just because I have a lot of daddy issues. This one really gets me. Like, this one gets me in the feels in a lot of ways. So,
I'll give you
for
a
me,
hug
this
when I
is the
see you
number 1.
next.
Thank you,
And
buddy.
Howard the
I
Duck.
appreciate
Can't forget about Howard the Duck.
Always good to see Howard. Always good to see Howard.
Well, we got an MCU movie that's not distributed by Disney. This was sort of a weird deal, but Sony was floundering a bit with Spider-Man, so they kind of worked out a deal where they made something work with Kevin Feige. He produced, and we got Spider-Man: Homecoming, directed by John Watts, last year in July of 2017. Tom Holland carries over the role that he kicked off in Captain America: Civil War. What I love about this movie is the Vulture. I love the Vulture. I love that the stakes of this movie weren't the end of the world, that it was just a little bit more dialed down. He was a neighborhood-friendly Spider-Man. it was, he wasn't trying to stop people from turning into lizards. He wasn't trying to stop a Green Goblin or mad. There was no mad scientist. This is really like the first Spider-Man movie without a mad scientist, if you think about it.
Yeah, you're right.
So it was really new territory. It was like a John Hughes movie, and it was just so much fun.
Hilarious movie. Being a big Spider-Man that I am, my criticism for this film, it just didn't feel like a Spider-Man movie per se. I just feel like Spider-Man's there and Tony Stark is just with him too. And I think they relied too much on him. And I've been talking a lot about that with some of the Spider-Man fans. I do feel that way, but regardless, I still find it enjoyable. It's hilarious. This is the first Spider-Man movie I thought it was very funny. I liked it more than the action itself. But yeah, I agree. Vulture was a great villain. But I really think they could do better with this character. And I blame it on Sony, not MCU. So.
That's funny because the thing that you just complained about was the MCU impact on it.
I know.
But it's Sony's fault. No, I completely disagree with you, because again, I have daddy issues, and that's what I love having Tony in this movie, because he provides a father figure for a young floundering Spider-Man, and that works for me. There's so much about this movie that works for me, but mostly what works for me in this movie is Aunt May. Like Marissa Tomei wins.
Of course.
Like, yeah, she wins.
Yeah,
But
I can't deny
man,
that. Well,
Spider-Man is really reckless. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm just saying Spider-Man was really
Yeah,
reckless in this whole film, and it just shows the teenager side of a superhero, which I could enjoy as well. So.
We follow up in November of last year with a Thor movie that was good. Thor Ragnarok, or as I like to say,
They got it right!
Right?
They
Thor
finally got
Ragnarok
it
and
right!
roll, as I like to call it.
Or as I call it, as Guardians of the Galaxy.
Right? Directed by Taika Waititi. This is the movie where if anybody complains that the MCU neuters its directors and takes away their creative vision, you just point at this movie, because this is a Taika Waititi movie. This is blockbuster level with his signature all over it. It is so good. I can leave this movie on a loop and just enjoy it. There's so many small moments, but there's very underrated character moments in this. And it is, I find this a very brilliant movie. It is a very different sensibility than a lot of movies out there, and which results in this movie being so refreshing, not just in terms of the MCU, but in terms of blockbusters in general.
Yeah, the Thor franchise definitely needed to be revitalized, and they did with Thor Ragnarok. It was hilarious. You actually cared about what's going on in Asgard with Thor and things. And once again, I really enjoyed the relationship between Thor and Loki, which is why I think Loki is one of the most intriguing characters in the MCU, for sure. And, yeah, Hela was a great villain. When you got Kate Blanchett to play a villain, yeah, you got to do good, and they did. And,
so good.
The way they handled Odin, I thought that was pretty good. Jeff Goldblum, he was hilarious. It was Jeff Goldblum. He was Jeff Goldblum pretty much. He played himself, I think, in this movie. And
well, the guy can't act. He only plays one role. I mean, he's as bad as Tom Cruise. He's just enjoyable.
Exactly.
I have to say, I don't want to see the next Jurassic Park. But he kind of makes me want to.
Yes, that's true. That's very true. I think that was a great thing to put in so we could actually care for this movie, for sure. But it's definitely an enjoyable movie, a fun movie. I enjoyed it a lot, so for sure. And Hulk was great as well. So
yes,
even though
Kate Blanchett chews scenery in this movie like nobody's business. She just embraces this role and eats it alive. I had a friend of mine recently watch it, and she was like, "Oh my God, I am in love with Kate Blanchett in this movie. She is sexy. She's scary. She's so powerful. She's in complete control. She has legitimate motivations. She just chews the scenery." And Taika Waititi's visual rendering of what a Thor movie should be is so refreshing. Is what I wanted out of an Asgardian movie all along. Like the final battle scene with like Thor leaping through the air and the lightning, and you're getting like just the Led Zeppelin soundtrack. Awesome. It's amazing. This movie just rocks on so many levels. Easily a top 5 movie.
I think I've watched this movie maybe 7 or 8 times now. I've thrown it on in the background while I'm at work so many times. I love this movie. I didn't even feel like I didn't feel it was necessarily going to be my top 5 movies when I first saw it, but it grows on me. I love this one. Then this past February we had the most recent entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, a little bit more of a dramatic turn with Ryan Coogler's take on Black Panther. I really love this movie. I like that the origin was established in Civil War, and it dovetails really nicely into this movie. Just a really strong movie. One of the MCU's best villains, especially a one-off villain, which is fairly difficult to accomplish with just one movie. Mm-hmm. Loki has been able to be appealing because I don't think I cared for him much in the first Thor movie, but in the Avengers is where I think people really started to like him, and where he was a little bit more charismatic. So having a villain last more than one movie is what helped with Loki. In this case, Killmonger has stayed self-contained in one movie, and it's still has had a crazy impact as far as a villain. I don't know a whole lot of people who think he's a very underdeveloped villain, but definitely one of the absolute strongest entries in the MCU.
It's a movie I definitely need to watch again, but the first time I saw it, I enjoyed it a lot. A great character development, great world that they built. Ryan Coogler has made a lot of my favorite movies so far, with Fruitvale Station and Creed, which I loved a lot as well. And it's definitely different than a typical Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, with the type of themes that they bring out, the type of character development. It really is to have a different feel to it, but I enjoyed it. Killmonger was awesome. My only gripe with that they really had to kill off Dr. Claw, but maybe I'm being nitpicky with that, because I really did enjoy Dr. Claw, but hey, it is what it is. Because Andy Serkis was great at that role, so.
Yeah, he was loving that role for sure. He was eating it up. Killmonger steals the movie in this. Thank God they finally. Who's the actor who played him?
Michael B. Jordan.
Yeah, thank God he finally got a superhero role that was good.
That wasn't Human Torch.
Yeah, because oh God, his Human Torch was dreadful. My only complaint about this movie is that there really isn't much that happens with Panther. That his arc is fairly minor compared to everybody else around him. Not that he doesn't have an arc, but it's not a particularly compelling arc, or not a particularly critical arc the way I saw the movie. I know there's Addy, you disagree with me on that, but I just
well, you can check out
to me he didn't do much.
You can always check out our review for Black Panther on Certain Point of View, certainpov.com if you want to check that one out. We go into much more depth there as far as the nuance of that arc and whether or not that works for you. At first I definitely agreed with you, Ben. I thought his arc was sort of in service of other characters, but as I think about the movie, I do think he has a much stronger arc. It's just it's different culturally, and it's also different from what we see in most movies. But I do really like this. So, Hans, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I also disagree with Ben. I think that's what made it stand on its own. I think that's why it makes it a unique type of film, for sure.
So if you want to hear everybody disagree with Ben, you can listen to that Black Panther
Yeah, because that's exactly what happes in that episode. Everybody's like, "You're a racist!"
Yeah, I'm surprised it's not happening yet for you. I'm surprised. Dang it, Ben.
I'm sorry, when you name the movie after a character, I assume that character is gonna be the central person in the movie, and that the movie is about, and it's just not in this movie.
Well, yeah, you can take a look at that review to check it out more. I think I think Ben makes a very compelling case for that, but you'll also have to see what the opposing arguments are for that, because it's a very interesting movie. It's a very strong movie. I don't think anybody is disagreeing with that.
I like it. It's an incredible movie. That's my only complaint about that movie.
Wakanda forever.
So that is our very long retrospective on the MCU. Of course, that could have been much longer. So we decided to just give you a little bit of a recap before going into Infinity War to kind of go through where, go through the paths of these, 18 movies that we've seen. Quick thing to just wrap this up before Ben and I get into TV reviews from the past week. But I just want to get your guys' top 5 MCU movies. Hans, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Let me find it right here. All right, top 5. Number 1, The Avengers. Number 2, Captain America: Civil War. Number 3, Guardians of the Galaxy. Number 4, Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Number 5, Thor: Ragnarok. And mind you, that list could change. That list could change probably in a year from now. Who knows? So.
I'm going to go with Guardians 2, Thor: Ragnarok, Iron Man. Is that 3 or 4?
That was 3.
That's 3.
That's
Gosh,
3.
did you
This is where it starts in my mind. It starts rotating around.
Well, if you don't have a definitive list, you don't have to give us more than 3. If you feel cornered now.
I don't feel cornered. If you ask me in another hour, I'll have a completely different list. Yeah. And once you get past the top 3, then it starts to kind of rotate around pretty much for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I would throw. Let's see. I would throw Guardians, the first Guardians in there, and I would throw, for my money, I really enjoy Doctor Strange.
Okay.
That's a good list. So mine definitely goes along with my sensibilities. One is, you guys had pretty tame ones there. Mine does have one that would infuriate fanboys. But mine does kick off with the first Guardians movie. It's a very close second with Guardians 2. For a while, I thought Guardians 2 might be my number 1, but I think I like how well balanced of a character and comedy story that the first Guardians movie is. So Guardians 1, Guardians 2, then it is Thor: Ragnarok, and then we have Iron Man 3, and then the original Iron Man. So
Okay.
that is my top 5.
Yeah, I can disagree with that.
Love it.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us, Hans. People can find you at realmoviecritic.com. Is there anything else?
Very soon will be my long overdue top 10 movies of 2017, also the worst of 2017, and also my real awards. It's coming soon.
Nice.
All of that is at realmoviecritic.com. Thank you for joining us, Hans.
Well, that's it for this episode of Certain Point of View. You can, of course, see Infinity War out today. We will be getting a spoiler-filled review soon in an episode of its own, but you can be sure that we will not put spoilers for Infinity War in any of our other episodes. You can check out all of our podcasts at certainpov.com. And until next time, stay scruffy, my Nerf herders.